Hello, my name is Kern Smith. I'm the Director of Enterprise Pre-Sales in the Americas for Zimperium. Today, we're going to be discussing mobile ransomware and really how we're seeing this start to target different areas of the enterprise. So let's begin. So just to kind of level set, Zimperium has, thousands of customers and is protecting, tens of millions of devices out there. And what we're seeing consistently is that 100% of all of our customers have seen some sort of major mobile threat. And why this is striking is that it just goes to show that, again, mobile is just another endpoint within the security stack. And when you think about how mobile is exposed, right, relative to some of your more traditional endpoints, it's connecting to unmanaged networks. There's typically some sort of concept of a personal workspace on the device, along with corporate resources, regardless of who manages the device. So, and they're connecting to unknown networks left and right, applications being pushed down to the devices, SMS text, things of that nature. So there's a lot of different exposure points that, that are relatively new for security professionals that are unique to mobile. But again, it goes back to basic security principles for endpoints. And this is where all of our customers are seeing these type of threats build up. So where this pertains to when we talk about ransomware is, again, what is old is new again. We're starting to see this pick up tremendously on mobile devices. So when we talk about this, what is it that we're seeing out there, right? Especially we talk about some different things around ransomware. There's different things around, blanket attacks or targeted attacks typically is also what we're seeing quite a bit of. So when we talk about the different attack mechanisms or attack surfaces on mobile, really it kind of breaks down in four generic categories, right? And there's always some offshoots of that. But when you talk about general threats, kind of the broad scatter a net around the world to see what you can pick up as an attacker, those are really around the malicious apps and the phishing attacks, right? Hey, let me put an app up into the app store. Maybe it has some malicious code into it. Let's see who downloads it and see what we can get. Or send out a spam email to a bunch of email addresses and see who clicks on the link, right? Now, there's different mechanisms that are in place to prevent that. But the other item that we're seeing a lot is on the enterprise side are the targeted attacks. And this is where an attacker is specifically targeting an enterprise, be it an enterprise user or an enterprise application, to directly compromise that enterprise through any number of means. And what we're seeing is that 90% of those targeted attacks are starting on the network side in some way, shape, or form. So why is this important? Well, as an attacker, there's a few different things I want to try to do in a targeted attack, especially by targeting the network. And when I target the network, that gives me the ability to pivot and maybe put a malicious app onto the device, a malicious profile, or do a browser-based attack with the ultimate goal of all of this stuff to gain some sort of persistence on the device and compromise the device. Now, any stage of those attacks, an attacker is going to be trying to look and see, hey, maybe I can sniff credentials. Maybe I can sniff them over the network. Maybe I can sniff them in memory when it's unencrypted. Any number of things, right? Then these credentials aren't just the enterprise credentials. Again, it goes back to how these mobile devices are being used. It's also personal credentials, right? Because a user is a user. And if I want to hold a user ransom, if I can compromise even their personal accounts, that gives me an in to then pivot and start looking over onto the enterprise side. The next area is just data, right? What data can I collect? How can I profile the organization? How can I profile the user to make a more targeted attack or gain more information to then use to pivot off and further expand my footprint? And then ultimately weaponization, right? If I can compromise the device, if I can put foothold onto that mobile device, then the next goal is how do I weaponize that? And the weaponization can take a lot of different forms. You have what I think a lot of people think of traditionally with weaponization of, hey, compromise the device. Let me try to break into different containers on the device, because if I've compromised the device, all the container security goes out the window, right? I can do screenshots, I can do keyboard grabs, I can download things from memory, try to get the information off the device. But also when you think about the level of connectivity that these devices have, electronically, right? People are bringing these devices into the corporate network. They're connecting back and forth. You have, let's just use email as an example. You have a trusted email account on the device, certs that are on the device, all these different things that are pushed to the device that are predicated on, do I trust the device or not? Well, then attackers compromise that device. Now that trust goes out the window. But the other item isn't just the electronic access the device has, it's the physical access, right? This device is physically with the user. So, and we'll get into some different use cases around there, but think about the sensors that are on the device, recording audio, taking pictures, even scanning the Wi-Fi network, say for example, a guest network, for any other devices that are also connected to that same network to see if there's any vulnerabilities there. There's a use case that we'll talk about on that area. There's an unlimited amount of ways that people are starting to weaponize these devices. So just kind of talk about how compromised devices can then start delivering ransomware, because it's not just about ransomware on the device, it's using the device as a stepping stone, as a beachhead to ultimately deliver some malicious payloads inside of the organization. So, a few different concepts around there. There's the pivot, right? How do I move from the mobile device off and go into other assets, bypassing all the other security perimeters that you have, sniffing, the recon, how do I kind of gather information and figure out where those vulnerabilities are? Because these mobile devices are really, really good recon tools. And then ultimately, how do I use the information collected off this device or the trusted accounts that are on this device to do targeted attacks, targeted spear phishing campaigns, right? Because if I have that, for example, you have an email container on the device, I've compromised the device, I now have control over that trusted email container. Now I can start sending targeted emails with malicious attachments, things of that nature, to other users, to other machines, and bypass all of those external filters because I'm already inside and using that trusted mail account, just as an example. So we'll talk about the pivot. This is actually a great use case that we saw out in the wild, where in this case, a pen tester was hired to test out a company's security. And what they found is that the easiest point of entry for them wasn't through some sort of hijacking of the firewall. It wasn't through setting up a honeypot network or anything, or going on site and putting different rogue access points in the parking lot or in the building. What they actually did is they targeted the receptionist, and they targeted the receptionist on her device. And in this case, they did a targeted campaign where they ultimately got her to download a gaming app on her device because she would give her device to her kid, and that gaming app was targeted for kids. So that gaming app was actually malicious. And what they found is that when the smartphone then connected to the guest Wi-Fi network, because the receptionist didn't have internal network access, but she was able to connect the device to the guest Wi-Fi network, the app was then able to scan for any other devices that were already connected onto that guest network. And by looking at those different areas and using that device as a recon area, they were able to find a vulnerable server also attached to the guest network, migrated from the device, created a connection to the server, created a stable shell, and ultimately were able to move laterally to this other server that then ultimately they used to then move to other servers, and basically were able to gain the golden key for Kerberos certificates. So again, this is how mobile is becoming one of the main entry points into organizations, because it is the true perimeter. If you can get onto a mobile device, this gives you the ability to start understanding what are the other attack surfaces that an attacker can leverage to move into the enterprise. Now, some other items, when we talk about sniffing and stuff, well, this is where you think about the connectivity that a mobile device has, where people are bringing the device with them physically on different enterprise campuses. So if you think about the proximity that the device has, both over Wi-Fi or just physical proximity, people plugging devices in, things of that nature. Well, now the device can have knowledge of, hey, there's an endpoint there, there's a server there, there's different printers, things of that nature that that the attacker can now leverage to map out what is the infrastructure of the enterprise target, and ultimately use that to deliver, very similar to the WannaCry approach, right? As soon as a infected host had knowledge of other vulnerable hosts, it then distributed different the WannaCry package across those hosts. That was the ability to pivot. So, and the reason we bring up WannaCry is that was created by the Lazarus Group, the North Korean sponsored hacking group. So, the reason this is important is that Lazarus Group has said, we're no longer focusing on Windows or traditional PCs. We're actually going to now focus solely on mobile. And so now we're seeing in the wild different malware variants that are being attributed to the Lazarus Group, where user downloads a malicious payload onto their device, and that payload is now sniffing all the networks the device is connected to, looking for different vulnerable hosts, and then trying to infect those hosts further to spread. The other item is that targeted spear phishing campaign. So this is where an attacker will really take advantage of the fact that users have been trained by the enterprise and by other consumer vendors to accept anything, right? Hey, what have we trained our users to do? Click on that prompt. Yes, I want to install. Yes, I want to follow those prompts. Just get me to what I want to get to, right? So this is where, if I'm as an attacker, once I've gathered some different data points, once I understand, and again, it doesn't take a lot of effort. If I can understand the enterprise, if I can understand what networks the device may connect to, as an example, automatically, what is the logo of the company, right? That's a starting point where I can then start crafting some very specific spear phishing campaigns that aren't necessarily going to come over email. So what I want to show you here is just an example, and we won't go through the whole video, but just a brief example of a targeted spear phishing campaign on iOS that will ultimately lead to a full device compromise. So in this instance, we have a user that's just sitting out minding their own business, and an attacker is nearby. Now, the user is a employee of Acme, so the attacker is going to actually stand up a rogue access point spoofing the Acme SSIDs. And what we'll see is once that gets broadcast, the device now has connected to this rogue Wi-Fi network with no user interaction at all. So now the attacker can use, now that the attacker has the device's network connection, it can then force the user to a web page that will tell the user, hey, if you visit acme.com, we're not going to take you there, but what we are going to do is take you to the attacker's web page to prompt the user to download a malicious payload that the attacker will then use to launch an exploit and gain full root persistence on the device. So you see here, this is where we've trained the user to do a lot of different things. So yeah, they're going to follow that prompt and install because Acme's telling me to do it. And once that payload's put onto the device, now the user follows those prompts, launches it, and the attacker now has that advanced root connection to the device. Now, this isn't jailbreaking, this isn't rooting, this is compromising the device. Because now as an attacker, they have access to everything and anything on the device, such as the keychain, right? But more importantly, what they can now do is leverage the permissions that device has to, say, for example, send an email internally from the trusted account. And this is how we can get over to moving laterally within the organization. Hey, send me sensitive information like W-2s. Maybe the attacker will also send a malicious attachment to a distribution group, any number of things, right? But they can also download photos from the device. They can download sensitive personal information to, maybe hold the user, blackmail the user. The options are limitless from an attacker's perspective. So this is just an example of an attacker leveraging that advanced persistent compromise on the device to send an email using the corporate mail container. So with that, just kind of jump back into the presentation here. So what how do we fight this, right? What's the approach? Now, one of the things that you may have seen there is that a lot of these targeted attacks start over the network. And this is why when you think about it, it's imperative that you have detections or protections that are built from ground up to exist on the device and be able to detect these attacks without ever having seen them before, right? To be able to detect attacks in isolation on the device. So I won't go into a full product pitch on Zimperium, but we'd love, if you're interested, we'd love to have you contact us and have a deeper dive into it. But this is where Zimperium's on-device detection engine, Z9, that leverages behavior-based detections trained by machine learning, is able to detect those targeted attacks, the network attacks, the device attacks locally on the device. It's able to also detect those broad-based attacks, the phishing attacks, right? The malicious application attacks, all these different things on device where the threat is occurring. And importantly, it's able to detect them without having to react, without having to connect to a backend, without having to get constant updates, without having to phone home. And why this is important is, as you saw in the previous attack, if I'm an attacker and say, for example, I seize that device's network connection, I can make it blind if that detection engine relies on some sort of cloud connectivity or has to get updates, or it's some sort of crowd or cloud sourcing aspect. This is why that on-device approach is so imperative to protect you against all these different types of attacks when they're happening, as they're happening on the device. And Gartner really agrees with this approach, right? Because it comes back to where is your data? Where is the endpoint that you want to protect? And how is it that you want to protect it? Well, ultimately, the attacker is targeting the device because that's where the data resides. So it just makes sense that you need to have that on-device detection to give you the best chance of detecting these attacks and ultimately preventing them from migrating from the mobile device and infiltrating the further corporate network. So the way that Zimperium is able to provide this on-device detection is really kind of two key ways. First off, from an enterprise perspective, we have our Zips application, and this is an application that the user can download from the public app store. It can be deployed via MDM or a MAM or UEM system, EMM, however you want to define it. But this is where we do detections and really display to the user and allow enterprises some granular controls to protect their data that may be distributed across the device, but it's all powered by that on-device Z9 engine. But also, we have that same Z9 engine that does its on-device behavior-based detection is also provided in our ZApp SDK. And this is where we can actually provide in-app protections during runtime for any customer's applications, both internal, but also importantly, consumer applications. So think of apps that your customers may be downloading to do transactions, consumer banking applications, retail applications, anything really, where Z9 can be embedded into the application using the ZApp SDK. And now this SDK can provide detections to the application, and the application can self-protect itself at runtime against any of those number of threats on device. This also leads us to some very flexible enterprise support capabilities and architecture. So again, we have that on-device detection and Zips and the ZApp SDK, but also the admin console becomes very flexible at this point, where you can deploy it to any cloud, anywhere. So we have automatic support for out of the box for AWS, Azure, Oracle, Google Cloud, etc., in different deployment models, even supporting on-prem, but also the integration components with SIEM solutions and multiple MDMs within a single console. So really being able to provide the real enterprise capabilities to allow this type of deployment, regardless of what model, enterprise or consumer or both, you are looking to protect, because ultimately it's how we prevent these devices from being leveraged to pivot off into your organization, regardless of where the attack came from, be it from an enterprise-owned device, from BYOD device, or one of your customers' devices. So thank you very, very much for your time today. Please contact Zimperium if you have any questions or would like to hear more. Thank you.